Welcome, everyone. I'm Mary Edmonds. I have the pleasure of getting to work here at the Faber Institute with Father Ganz. And for those of you who might not have joined us online for our Faber sessions before, the Faber sessions actually started during COVID when we obviously weren't all meeting together in person, and Zoom was pretty new, but we decided to give it a try. And we started the Faber sessions, the first Faber sessions, we're now on the 10th, with the Chronicles of Narnia. It was, like I said, Zoom was new. And so as we were giving it a try, we decided to try to keep it small. And so we invited a select group of people to join our Faber sessions on Narnia. And we decided now, after we've done many other Faber sessions, that we were going to circle back around to Narnia and include everyone and open it up for anyone to join. So we're so glad that you're able to be here. Whether you read Narnia recently or you've read it in the past, whether you joined us for that first Faber sessions with Narnia or this is your first time, I think anytime we read this book, we read it differently because we are different. I first read this book in elementary school, actually at my school, and had a group discussion, which I'm sure will be very different from this group discussion now for me 30 years later. This is my 7-year-old Cora. And this time around, as I'm rereading it for the third or fourth time, I decided to invite Cora to read it along with me. So we've been reading The Magician's Nephew at bedtime, and we're about halfway through. We haven't made it all the way through, but it's been fun getting to reread this and have her perspective as well. So welcome. This is obviously the first of many sessions in this around this particular theme. Just for anyone who hasn't been on here before, I'll keep everyone muted for the most part. And then when we have discussion times, feel free to unmute yourself and you can jump in, or you can do the raise your hand, or you can physically raise your hand and we'll call you in for that discussion time. So I'll be keeping an eye on the chats if there's anything you want to bring to my attention there. And also, this time around, we would love for you to enjoy your dinner while you are here with us. So you don't have to be right up front in front of the screen. Feel free to sit back and have us across the table as your dinner guest. Cora and I have our little charcuterie tray here that we'll be snacking on as we have our discussion. So please feel free to do that and still keep your camera on and join us in that way. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll turn it over to Father Ganz. He'll take us into The Magician's Nephew.
Mary, thank you. As you were doing the introduction, I'm looking across the screen and there's some of you I've missed. It's nice to see you again. And some of you I haven't seen in a long time, and some are brand new here. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Calvin Johnston, all the way in from Cincinnati. Look at you. So it's just very nice to see you all and to be able to share these masterpieces with you. I want to mention that Mary has talked about this is now her 5th time through the books. And I want to remind you what C.S. Lewis said. He said, the test of a good story is whether it is often reread. In fact, he went so far as to say that a reader is not someone who just reads a book and then reads another one and then reads another one. Gosh, I've read a lot of books. For him, that isn't what a reader is. A reader is one who reads good books that place demands on the reader, and you reread and reread the same books. That's an interesting take on it. So those of you who've read it before, you're welcome. And as Mary said, you can never read in the same way because you're different than you were when you last read them. And we hope, in the case of all of us, that we're all deeper. We've been changed by our experiences. And so our ability to see things in the story that we didn't see before, because we weren't grown up enough in some ways, suddenly we can see them and can be really affected in powerful ways. That is my prayer. The greatest source The greatest richness in the Faber sessions is you. Incredible experience looking across these screens. Some of you have lived a long time, like me, just racing toward my sarcophagus, and others of you who are younger, even very young. But there's a tremendous richness in you, and I hope that you'll feel free to engage and react and respond and offer your best thoughts, because it enriches all of us. And before I do just an opening prayer asking God to bless us in this endeavor, I want to remind that at one place C.S. Lewis notes he did a lot of writing in the significance of fairy tales, as did J.R.R. Tolkien, because the very ability of, quote, children's stories to be heard by adults had been made impossible by people saying those are just kids' stories. What are you wasting your time reading kids' stories? And one of the things Lewis said was, there's no such thing as a children's story. There's only a good story and a bad story. Now, fairy tales are meant to cast a spell. Often it talks about spells being cast. But Lewis, who came to the writing of the Narnian tales late in his life, these are works that are from the very, fullest. It's in the last 10 years of his incredibly rich life that he wrote these stories. Consider the Chronicles of Narnia as magic books whose intent lay in breaking the hold of a particular kind of dark enchantment, bewitching modern people. Such bewitchment had caused an icy winter, to use language from Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, in the world, which would not let go, which had frozen human longing, a profound longing for we know not what, that Lewis identified with an experience of joy. So stories like this are meant, they have enchantment to them. But there's an enchantment that can put you under its spell, letting the story have you. Don't try to have the story or figure out the story. Let it have you. And there's another kind of enchantment that is meant to break a spell. Lewis wanted both of these things. I'd like to refer to a text from the book of Revelation, chapter 21, and it's just the previous verses were talking about a world, like not another world, our world, in which we adults had step by step simply wrecked the whole world through our behaviors and our habits. We'd wrecked it. And at the end of it all, the world is running full speed away from God. And so it all falls apart. Remember, I'm talking about a text that was written in the time of the Romans, so you have to be careful about we're talking about something a long time ago here in this text. But then there's these lines in Revelation 21, the very next chapter, in the very next lines, that sound like this. And I wonder if we might, hearing these words from the sacred scriptures, feel something of hope spark in us. Because that's the piece that I want to be our prayer, that gives light to our inner eyes and opens us to the power of the story we're about to engage. From Revelation chapter 21, starting at verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first Earth had disappeared now. That's the one we wrecked. And there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride dressed for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice call from the throne, "Look, here God lives among human beings. God will make his home among them. They will be his people, and he will be their God, God with them. He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more killing and no more mourning or sadness or pain. The world of the past has gone." Loving God, thank you that we could gather from all these places we're gathering from, and to remember by revering and attending to a novel of C.S. Lewis. We thank you for his life and the price he paid to be as deep a person as he was. We thank you for his scholarship, his loves, his losses, the considerable suffering in his life that had to have been there for him to have become so wise. Thank you for giving him the strength to endure that, so that we, so many years after he's died, can be blessed by his work. Most of all, open our hearts to you working in this story, and speak to us in that hidden way that only you can, knowing exactly where we each need to hear your word. Amen. I'd like to begin kind of the conversational part of this by appealing to those of you who have read the book, and by asking this, it is not meant for you who didn't, such losers that you are, to feel like you've just been excluded. You have not. I'm trying to draw out the richness of the group so you, not having read it, can benefit from the readers who've read it. And in that regard, bring you in to the conversation. So what I'd like to ask you is, and Mary, you can bring people in. I want to ask you, what is The Magician's Nephew about? So that's the question. Now, the way this will work is this. A person who is bold enough to be the first to go will say something, and we'll go, "Wow, that was pretty lame." No, we'll say, "Thank you for being the first one." Then the next one will speak, and that person will have had the benefit of the first one going first, and they usually can go deeper or to a richer place or a more open place than the first one who gave it a go. You see what I'm saying? So that by maybe the third time, the first one will say, "God, I wish I could speak again." But that's the gift of the one who goes first. They help us in. So Shirley, what is your answer? And opening your sound so we can hear you. You have to unmute yourself. What is this book about? Let's see. It's still not unmuted.
Oh,
Can you?
there we
there
go. I will be the lame one.
Thank you. Thank you
I'll
for
be the lame first one. I am not quite done with this. And even though these were my favorite books, I never read this one. So
okay.
for me, very briefly, to me, it's about creation and how God can make everything come to life, even a broken lamppost. And he uses all for good. So I'll start that way.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm just collecting. I won't comment unless something is so clearly bizarre, but it wasn't. We're just collecting. Anyone else? What is the book about?
Yeah, Sharfs, go ahead and unmute.
We didn't get our set yet to reread, so it's been a few years back.
Yeah.
I have to say that my memory is a little vague, but
That's
a
okay.
couple things stood out from long ago, and one was this is kind of collision of dark forces and light forces, and that there was something about the young ones. There was a freshness of spirit and belief and readiness to jump in the young ones, the not yet formed ones, maybe.
Yeah. Thank you, Barb. That works perfect. See, hasn't read it in a while, but things stay with you about a book. And that's all I'm asking. What do you remember about it if you haven't read it in a while or if you've read it more recently? Thank you. Anyone else?
Katie, go ahead and unmute.
There you are.
I'm here. To me, this book is about love and the lengths that people and God will go to express and make that love alive. I mean, we have Diggory, who loved his mother so much and who had to make hard decisions as a result. We have Polly and her amazement and love, and the Cabby, and of course, Aslan walking around singing the world into being, which I just find so dazzling to think of it that way.
Yes.
And the stars sing it, all creation sings. And his is all, his is all love, but there's such delicacy in the way he expresses it to the humans and the animals in there.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you.
I don't know how to raise my hand, but I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I had just been thinking about Uncle Andrew ever since he started talking, and for whatever reason, to me, it's like, well, from Uncle Andrew's perspective, what's going on, what's it about, and it's just self-deception. And it made me think a lot about this Matthew Kelly book called Resisting Happiness that was circulated in my parish for a while, and it's just like, there are so many opportunities. God is good all the time. So many opportunities to turn to him and figure it out. Or you can, well, I guess he was planted initially upside down. Or you can bury your head in the sand and not look. And so, yeah, from Uncle Andrew's perspective, the book is about self-deception.
Thank you, Kellen. One more. Thank you just for helping us collect.
I'll just say something then, because I could ditto everything everyone's already said, but I would just add one of the things that's always bewildered me and I wonder about is the origin of evil. God's so good and he created everything good. And in the Gospel of John, in the opening, it says, through Christ, everything was made that was made. But what C.S. Lewis, I think, does so masterfully in the story is shows how evil entered this perfect world that he created with Narnia. And he didn't necessarily make it, but it got in. And I just thought that was a wonderful way to portray that mystery of how evil springs up. And then, of course, Aslan said, well, I can contain it for a long time, but eventually destruction from the evil force will happen, but I will take most of it onto myself. And that to me is obviously the Christ figure. So just beautiful balance there, good and evil.
Thank you, Heidi. Shirley, did you have one emendation to make there? Take off your mute button there. There we go.
There we go.
There we-
Sorry.
Yeah, that's good.
But there's so many that echoes of Eden. Somebody else was talking about the self-deception of Uncle. And I just thought it was so interesting how he's so enamored of the witch, yet so frightened of her. She leaves the room and then he kind of forgets. It's almost like an addiction. He forgets the evil part of that addiction, that idolizing is pure evil. And he starts to think, man, she's really pretty. Maybe she'll marry me. You know?
Damn fine woman.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And fine woman, that's right.
And then also the let's forget God. God's not God. I'm God. You know, how he started to say, I created this. I'm such a great magician. Yeah. A lot of parallels to Genesis.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. It really helps us all kind of wake up to the story and start to work our way into it, or let it work its way into us. That's probably more important. Let me just take a moment to take a step with us now that we've just kind of opened the story a little bit. I want to first say that it was a kind of a trick question to you about what the book is about, but it's a useful, misdirected question. Probably the better question is, what does the magician's nephew actually say versus what is it about? We can very quickly start talking about what we think something is about, but we have not taken the time to actually pay attention to what it actually says. There's never anywhere in there a reference to Genesis or to God or to Jesus Christ. Zero. And this is deliberate by C.S. Lewis, who is a deeply, profoundly affected Christian man. But he was very concerned that the narrative around the gospel, around what God has done in the human story, has become so conventionalized from the way we've been taught, hearing over and over again these, Jesus died for our sins, I'm a sinner, all that stuff we've heard a million times, can actually deaden us to the significance of what God did and is actually doing with us. And so he deliberately dislocated the story into a completely different story in another world completely, in the hopes that you would fall under the spell of the story, and if you will, rediscover when you come back to your world who God is and what God has done for us in Christ. But we don't want to import our convictions back into Narnia and make the Narnian story fit with the way we've been taught. You see what I'm saying? We're trying to get to a freshness, and this was very deliberate by C.S. Lewis. The second thing I would say about what is the magician's nephew about? Why that's a kind of misdirection question that's useful, is what the magician's nephew means is not so much what Lewis, the author, intended when he wrote the story, which seems surprising to us. We should know what he intended for us to know what the story means, right? Not really. Why? Because any great act of creativity, like these most certainly are, there is far more in the story than the author realized. An author is led by a story to think things, to propose things, to express things in the story that the author himself, in this case, himself, will not recognize was in the story till later, when a little kid might ask him and write him a letter. And Lewis had lots of letters around the Chronicles of Narnia. I remember one particularly sweet one about a young boy who had written the story. He just loved the stories, and he loved Aslan so much. But he was worried that maybe he loved Aslan more than Christ. And he was always hearing about Christ at church. And he was worried about that, like maybe it was wrong that he loved Aslan, I think, more than Jesus. And Lewis immediately wrote back. And it eventually became a book. It was a correspondence of letters to children. It's not what Lewis meant, is not what the magician's nephew means. But it's more, in what ways did the story get a hold of you, activate you, open your eyes, and put you to the test? That's the part that will make our time together through Narnia so rich. If you're willing to talk a little bit about that, the impact the story had in you. And all of us, by the end of our journey through Narnia, will, in a way that we've never known it before, will, if you will, finally know what the Chronicles of Narnia were about. Its impact on you, in you. It's part of the significance of what a story is. Now let me, having said that, try to guard you against something that I just referred to earlier, that Lewis wanted you to be guarded from. And that is to allegorize the story. And immediately when you see Aslan, say, well, that's Jesus. No, it's not. That's a lion that happens to talk. That is the lion who is the great lion of Narnia, who has his own personality and way of being. In other words, be careful about allegorizing. This means this. Well, this in the, I was taught this about sin, and that's what this story is saying about sin. You see what I'm saying? So the allegorizing, try to hold back from that. And I want you to hear what Lewis himself said about this point and his worry that people would take this story and try to turn it into a sermon or write books about Christ in Narnia. And you're going, no, because often our very theology, our religious understanding is warped. It's not very good. And a story, a trip to Narnia, can cause us, through what we experience it there, to come back into our world and really need to rethink things we've been taught, to deepen our understanding, bring more richness to it. Here's what he said, quote, I thought I saw how stories of this kind could steal past a certain inhibition which had paralyzed much of my own religion in childhood. And what he's referring to in his story is how he was told he was supposed to feel. You're supposed to feel sad about that. No, you're supposed to feel joyful about that. And being told what he was supposed to feel, or told what he was supposed to believe without any explanation, for him who was so bright, it really alienated him and caused him to just freeze. This night might not be true for you, but it was for him. Why did one find it so hard to feel as one was told one ought to feel about God or about the sufferings of Christ? I'm continuing the quote here. I thought the chief reason was that one was told one ought to. An obligation to feel can freeze feelings. The whole subject was associated with lowered voices, almost as if it were something medical. He's reflecting on his experiences as a boy and how he was being catechized. But supposing that by casting all of these things, these great teachings of our faith, into an imaginary world, stripping them of their stained glass and Sunday school associations, one could make these truths for the first time appear in their real power. Could one not thus steal past those watchful dragons? I thought one could. Can I ask you, do you know what he's talking about? Have you felt something of what he felt about being told how you're supposed to believe or feel, and you really struggled because you just didn't feel that? And because you didn't, you felt like you didn't belong to God or something, or certainly not to the group. And so you pushed away. Or let me put it this way. Lewis reacted so strongly, and it had to do around the time he was 13 years old, or 10 years old, excuse me. Edith Stein was 13 years old. He was 10 years old when he not only pushed back from all of that at the death of his mom, it was so hurtful to him because he had told, if you only had faith and prayed to God, your mom will be healed. So he tried to feel faithful. He tried to feel loyal and true to God and did everything he could to just pray and hold his hands just right. And his mom died. And it just shattered his theological, everything he'd been taught. He said it's all a lie. The point is not to encourage you to feel even this. I don't want you to feel like you needed to rebel, but did you? Because if you have, you can appreciate what Lewis, at the end of his life, was trying to offer people through these stories by taking them to another land where the power and the truths of our faith, our Christian faith, are so luminously expressed, but with talking animals and a lion, for heaven's sakes, and little kids, wolves and wargs and all these things. But inside the story, find the meaning of the deepest meanings of what God is doing with us, illuminated. Like, I get it. Why can't I go to Narnia to church? It feels so alive and real. And you hear the kids in a later story say that. Why can't we come back? And he says, well, because you knew me here, you will know me by another name back where you live. You see? So can I ask you, just before we take a further step, Do you have an experience? Do you understand this that Lewis is trying to say? About a kind of rebaptism of our imagination around our faith, a kind of re-seeing what has been drilled into us that left us cold, maybe, or lost. We really wanted to understand, but just couldn't. Didn't make sense. It's kind of a personal question, so you need not reply, but I wanted to at least appeal to you as a way of saying, if you have felt that, Lewis felt that. And it's one of the things he was trying to heal in the writing of these 7 stories. Any comments? And I'll just wait, and if none of you want to jump in, we'll take our next step.
Yeah, Katie.
Well, I have to say, having gone to school with, a majority of sisters with the holy names, and then Franciscans in grade school, I guess. I never had a problem believing, but I have to say, until I read the Chronicles of Narnia, and I was an adult when I discovered the books and read them, I never had any particular longing to go to heaven.
Hmm.
It was a place that was incomprehensible, and I just, it wasn't something that I thought would be wonderful. So I guess I decided when I was in grade school that it probably meant I wasn't meant to be a saint, and and probably meant not to be a nun. I don't know, but though I, was able to immerse myself in the teaching as such, I didn't fall in love with the idea until I read Narnia.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, Mary. Go ahead and unmute.
I think you've just captured why this series is so meaningful for so many people. There's something so pure, just this pure love about the experience of it that for me gets me out of my head of the academic approach, right? And so thank you for really succinctly describing why it means so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shirley.
Thank you, Mary.
Yes, thank you, Mary. That reminded me of something. I remember when I think I was in first grade and I had my little, you had way back in the prehistoric days, you had little missiles that were glossy and they smelled really good like a fresh book does. And I remember seeing a little picture of Jesus and really thinking, who is he though? Who is Jesus? Because back in those days, it was a little different with the teachings in the Catholic Church. And then when I read Narnia, I think I so loved Aslan that when I read that you were going to be, this was the subject of our book, next few months, it just almost made me want to cry because Aslan personalized Jesus. Sweet, compassionate, powerful. What is that saying? He is good, but he's not safe.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask you why the book has the title it does? Did you think about that? So first of all, who is the magician's nephew? Do you know?
Diggory.
It's Diggory, yeah. But why didn't he just call the book Diggory? I mean, come on. Why the magician's nephew? It's odd, isn't it? I'm going to suggest that it's a key to the understanding of the heart of this book. To call the book The Magician's Nephew highlights at the center of the story is a recognized relationship. This story, at the center of it, is relationship. And what happens when that is done poorly and when it's done well? And why, at the very heart of the arrival of the lion into Narnia, is the establishment of a bond of relationship such that the very first word after singing comes after a long silence. We'll get to that text. It's so beautiful. There's just this long silence. And then the lion breathes on all the living creatures and then says, the very first word is love. The heart of God is relationship. And we are notoriously consistent about messing up that. The Magician's Nephew highlights relationship. Now, I want to take you to a moment when, through the devilry of Uncle Andrew, Polly disappears into the wood between the worlds, and then Diggory, out of some noble soul in himself, realizes he needs to go get her. He has to go get her. What the wood between the world is, I'm fascinated to find out what you think that might be. It took me a long time to figure out that one. What exactly is that place? But as you recall, the first place they arrive is a dead world named Charn. And the word Charn is supposed to capture, I believe, that idea of the charnel house. So a charnel house was a place, often in monasteries actually, where if they buried all the monks in these monasteries that went on for hundreds of years, there'd be no space left to do farming. There'd just be bodies everywhere. So what they would do is they would create a sacred ground within a monastery. They would bury the bodies there and wait for them to decompose. So however, they knew how long that was. Then they would dig the body back up, clean up the bones, and put the bones in a charnel house. So if you saw a charnel house in these monasteries, you go in there and it's just filled with bones. It's a little alarming. It's not kind of where I would go with it, but it was a practical thing that allowed them to maintain contact with their ancestors, that, if you will, the brothers or the sisters did not need to leave the community simply by death, but some of them still remained, if you will. So that was the charnel house. It was a place where death was kept. And so we have a world called Charn. This is not Narnia. So this is a world that had grown up, existed, and died. And we learn a little bit about why and who. But remember, I quoted, kind of prayed with that text from the book of Revelation. Before the new heaven and new earth, the previous verses are about a world that had come and been wrecked by those who lived in it and brought it to complete destruction. until their last act was simply to run from God, which brought about their own destruction. Because we are made for God, and God is the one who made us. We can't run from our source without dying. So I want to take you back to Charn, to a moment in chapter 4 where Diggory and Polly have come into this palace that's broken down but still up in substantial ways. He talks about arches and pillars, and eventually come into this great room where there's this enormous table, like a festive table. And to their startlement, the table is filled with magnificently dressed statues. There's nothing living there. They're just stone statues, sitting in seats with incredible vesture, beautiful vesture, as if frozen in time. But I want you to listen to the observation of Diggory and Polly looking at the faces. And I'm going to read it to you. It's from chapter 4, and it starts this way. But Diggory was more interested in the faces. And indeed, these were well worth looking at. I keep thinking of these Zoom boxes, and you're just faces there, you know? The people sat in their stone chairs on each side of the room, and the floor was left free down the middle. So like a huge nave that you could walk down, and the walls lined with these seats. You could walk down and look at the faces in turn. They were nice people, I think, said Diggory, and Polly nodded. Now what I want to ask you as you hear that, what does a nice face look like? You know this. You and I react to faces. Have you ever thought, what does a nice face look like? If you were asked, well, what the heck does that mean? They have a nice face. Polly nodded. All the faces they could see were certainly nice. Both the men and women looked kind and wise, and they seemed to come of a handsome race. But after the children had gone a few steps down the room, they came to faces that looked a little different. These were very solemn faces. You felt you would have to mind your P's and Q's if you ever met living people who looked like that. There's something in the faces, in the solemnity that you and I can see in a face, that feels like there's judgment there, and that you aren't safe in front of that face. So you get nervous. Do you see how the first faces are approachable and draw and invite relationship? This next set starts to make relationship more problematic. Would I want to know someone like that? I don't think I'd ever be good enough. Have you ever seen faces like that in middle school? But that's another story. When they had gone a little further, they found themselves among faces they didn't like. This was about the middle of the room. The faces here looked very strong and proud and happy, but they looked cruel. A little farther on, they looked crueler. Further on again, They were still cruel, but they no longer looked happy. Isn't this amazing? This is Lewis at his best. So perceptive, and he's watching and paying attention. They were even despairing faces, as if the people they belonged to had done dreadful things and also suffered dreadful things. The last figure of all was the most interesting, a woman even more richly dressed than the others, very tall. But every figure in that room was taller than the people of our world, parentheses, with a look of such fierceness and pride that it took your breath away. Yet she was beautiful too. Years afterward, when he was an old man, Diggory said he had never in all his life known a woman so beautiful. It is only fair to add that Polly always said she couldn't see anything especially beautiful about her. What is your reaction to that text? What do you think is going on? Why did he take so much time to walk us down the room and have us look carefully into those faces?
Yeah, Shirley?
Is it because they're getting closer to the witch? Is it something having to do with distance? Influence?
Well, you're exploring, and I like that instead of asking a question, just feel free just to state what you think. And what you think is you're kind of thinking that. And I think that's valid because we will find out that things that are really bent and evil really don't like sitting around things that are really good and beautiful. So there's a distancing in the room that makes sense that way. Anyone else? Why did C.S. Lewis have us take so much time telling us what Diggory and Polly saw in those faces, in the world of charm? Barb.
This is probably very speculative, but what's going on for me is the movement on a spectrum from a more unconditional, invitational experience to a highly conditioned world. And the highly conditioned brings with it a kind of threat and judgment and great discomfiture. And that spectrum is maybe kind of the spectrum of love, love offered, love withdrawn or not offered.
Yeah. One of the things that's in the story is the book is said that the magician's nephew, Lewis is saying this is Diggory's story. Even though there are many other powerful characters, this is Diggory's story. And it's not only Diggory's story, but it will explain how Diggory became the wise professor who would guide the children in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. What Diggory learned and what he did with apple and seed and a tree growing in this world, which when it got blown down in a windstorm, the wood from which became the wardrobe that was in the house of the professor, to which the kids fleeing the bombing in London came to, and through which they entered Narnia. This is Diggory's story. So that's a clue for us about this room that we've just walked through. What we see when we read the story of Diggory, as they go through the wood between the world and come into Charn, and the curiosity in him that even against Polly saying, don't do it, this place feels dangerous, he kind of slaps her back because he's curious in a wrong way of curious. He just wants to know things without any alertness to why does he need to know that? There is a progression we're meant to feel between Diggory as a boy and things we're finding in him, flaws in his character that put him and Polly in danger, that are more fully developed in his uncle Andrew, who was once a boy, who had those things in him, who now we see him as a full-grown man, and the result of this thoroughly dangerous and unpleasant and vicious man. And the next progression is Jadis. It's the same trajectory. That room is a room showing how each of us can progress from being fresh from God, newborn, kind and sweet and full of love, and then things start coming in to our life that starts to take the joy away, and we become solemn and judgmental. Think of cliques when that starts to happen, to the heartbreak of adults who say, please, I don't want to lose my beautiful child to that kind of meanness that takes their joy away. And suddenly they're more solemn, and you catch their unprotected eyes looking in, worried about, am I okay? The room in the hall at Charn is a beautiful suggestion of the trajectory of the story, Diggory's story. He has the roots in him of Queen Jadis. And the significance of the saving of his life, as my sister Katie said, in that he never let go of the love he had for his mom. That relationship would not break. He kept, I've got to get back to her. I have to do something to help her. It's a theme that's picked up in the Harry Potter stories when we learn about Harry and all the difficulty of his life that he has to go through, the persecution and being hunted by all sorts of evil forces. The thing that holds his life is that his mother gave his life protecting him, and it put a mark in him that was an extraordinary power and a guarding and a warding power, protect him from harm. The boy who lived. Diggory was a boy who lived. And this is the story of the danger he got in. And I think the room in Charn is a beautiful expression of what Lewis is trying to show us. Any comments?
Yeah, Katie.
I like this, Rick. the way you're describing that. Because it's like you say, you start out young and fresh from God, and like Diggory, then you develop willfulness, brought on by curiosity, which is fine, but then it turns into willfulness. I want to find out, and I'm going to find out, which was just like Uncle Andrew, who started getting into all these magical things, and then to the point where he didn't care what anyone else around him suffered, including his sister or anybody else. He just wanted to get the power. And, this whole progression shows what happens if things are not reined in, or if there isn't a strong base to hold you down from going from feeling like an outsider to seeking the power so that you can make others be the outsiders while you are protected by your own will. So I like that a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Anyone else?
I'm chewing on something that Katie said, and I'm not quite sure I'll actually be able to get back to it. But at the, when you asked us what it was about, I kind of thought degradation, but then of course it was too complicated because it didn't turn out that way. But then it was like, obviously we see options and opportunities to take that path and end up degraded as Jadis, and Uncle Andrew wishes he could even be that degraded. But there's something about Andrew's turn towards this kind of wholesale excuse for his conduct. I'm held to a different standard.
Exactly.
I'm experimenting. There's this different realm of moral analysis or accountability or whatever that he fantasized that he occupied. And that was kind of a precondition to that degradation. And I'm now still thinking about how Diggory relates to that, but that there appears to be a way out from that difficult moral analysis and continual accountability loop. And it's declaring yourself above the law. Like, I'm just entitlement. Like, I'm doing something so important because I've declared it important, but I'm doing something so important that the rules don't apply to me. And to me, like, as I was hearing that last comment, it kind of struck me that was the fulcrum, or maybe the fork in the road towards the degradation that obviously Jadis exemplifies and Andrew is emblematic of. But yeah, very interesting stuff.
Thank you, Cullen. Yeah, that whole idea of being being above the law, that's for the small people. I have a high destiny, and it's so lonely up here, but that's me, and that's my destiny to do essentially what I want to do. You'll remember, or you'll find out again when we come to the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, that one of the things that Aslan the Great Lion does is he respects his own laws by which he made Narnia. In this story, the law he put in there is what he holds himself to later on in the story of the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's Queen Jadis who's trying to get him to break his own rules, and he won't do it. He has to defeat her by going deeper than the law that she's using and manipulating to try to break him and make him like her. Let me just pause because it's 7:07. Can we just do that? Mary, is that right? We're supposed to stop here?
Sure.
And so go ahead and tell people what they can, the ice cream sundae with sprinkles and maybe a little banana split on top, whatever it needs.
We just, in the Faber sessions, we like to take just a quick break for a few minutes to allow people to get up, run to the restroom, refill their drink, or just have a break for a few minutes before we start back into the last little bit before we finish. So we'll say let's come back at 7:12. That's just a quick 4-minute break, and then we'll continue with the last part of this. So feel free to get up, stretch your legs, or stay and chat. We'll be here, and I'll call you back when it's time to come back on.
That's great. Well, Bill Lemke, how did Jill's dad enjoy his steak and lobster that you cooked on the barbecue out there?
Took Chili Riano's.
Oh, that's pretty good too.
So he's from Logan, New Mexico. So I went to a mercado today. And I
Yes.
learned all about chilies, and that's what was for dinner.
That sounds really good. I had one of those yesterday. Really good, yeah. Is Logan, New Mexico is that part of the furnace lands down there, just hotter than Hades?
Yes, yes. Although
Goodness.
I think my place in Logan got about 6,400 inches of rain yesterday, which is a first moisture in several weeks.
Wow.
We're pretty well dry. He's on a Northwest tour. Jill and I brought him to he had lunch at Timberline a couple days ago on Friday.
Oh, yeah.
Down to see Wes and Beth with us in Bend.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go up and see Ethan up in Grand Coulee next weekend in Lake Chelan.
My gosh, that's where he's up there in the Grand Coulee area? Electric City?
In a place called Elmer City.
Elmer. I haven't heard of that one.
Look that one up. It's like it's Twin Cities. You
Wow.
Coulee City, Grand Coulee, and Elmer City.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. How are you?
Welcome to the Northwest. Yeah.
It's been great. They're treating me like a king.
Isn't that something? And do you still like your daughter or not so much anymore?
Oh, I always have liked Jill.
Yeah, she's pretty special. Yeah. We went to a little favorite funky restaurant in downtown Vancouver today, and all the owner could do was blah, 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 Jill that, Jill this. It was nauseating. That's your girl, Bill.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Good seeing you again.
Yeah, you too, Bill. Thank you.
Are you going to do the event at that winery in the fall?
Yes, we are. Yes.
I have a picture of Jill that's on the deck.
Oh, right out there at Amatera. That's great.
Right there on my desk. Yeah.
Yes, I hope you guys come. It's that Sunday that begins Thanksgiving week.
Okay.
Fireside evening. Yeah.
All right. Well, good seeing you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Yang Xin Wu. Hello there. Where are you coming in from? Where are you saying hello from?
I'm in Portland,
Okay.
West. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, is looking out your window there, are you up high or am I looking straight into trees or something?
Yeah. So my apartment is on a hill, and I live also on the highest floor of my apartment building.
There we go. Okay. Lots of light. Yes. Well, it's nice to have you here. Have you read the stories yourself?
Actually, no, I have never read the Chronicles of Narnia. And when I saw your email, I thought, okay, I'm gonna motivate myself to read it this time.
Oh, I hope you love it. I feel so envious is the wrong word because that's a capital sin, but I'm envious of those who get to read them for the first time.
Yeah.
because they're so good, and I just can't wait for people to just let it be. And just my saying that doesn't mean, well, you're supposed to like it. That's what C.S. Lewis was, someone telling you what you're supposed to feel. No, it's not about that. But I just trust the stories so much that they really have power in people's lives, and people just enjoy them. They're good stories. Yeah. Hope that's true for you.
I hope
All right,
so.
everyone. We'll go ahead and come back on. Again, we love seeing your faces. So if you want to turn your videos back on, that'd be wonderful. And we will have our final bit so that we can wrap up at 7:30. So welcome back on.
Welcome back, everybody. I think where I'd like to go is the way C.S. Lewis structures The Magician's Nephew. I think he takes a cue from Dante, the Divine Comedy Dante, which he studied and loved that work. The first canto of the Inferno, which is the first of the 3 volumes that make up the work. What's striking about the first canto is it describes a failed journey. It's about a man, Dante himself, who finds himself at the midpoint of his life, lost. And any of you, in order to understand this, have to be willing to go to a time in your life where you really felt lost. Either through dumb things that you did and it threw your life off, or the circumstances in which you lived your life overwhelmed you and you were kind of brutalized by it or confused by it. You just felt lost. He describes that when he starts this story, The Inferno. In the midpoint of my life, I felt lost. And he tries by his own power to get the heck out of there. But like a lot of us, we don't know how. We're lost. We're stuck. The Canto 1 is a failed journey. And it's only in Canto 2 of the Inferno that it begins the journey that will be successful. But it goes by a route unexpected and much more complicated that took him back not only through his own personal story, but the whole story of the context and history of his life as an Italian and all the politics that form and shape all of us all the time and bend us and break us in a lot of ways. He had to take a journey all the way back through that, looking for understanding that would open him to a time of purgatory and eventually a time of redemption. The Magician's Nephew also begins with a failed journey. They end up in Charn, sent there by an evil-intended Uncle Andrew. And through something already alive in Diggory, responds or corresponds to the death of the place in a much simpler way, but it presents itself as a curiosity that is intemperate. I just want to know, and no one's going to keep me from what I want to know. The headstrong thing that Katie talked about, willfulness, gets him into trouble, big trouble. And not only for him, but for Polly. Like our own failings can put other people in danger. And they try to get the heck out of there and go back. But once you do that, you can't really go back because you're carrying the wound with you. She grabs on and won't let go and ends up in the wood between the worlds. And they try to escape and end up in another pool that takes them not to a dead place, which is Charn, a world that we destroyed by our own choices, and the progression through that room from worse and worse and worse until eventually we turned over our freedom to someone who's a monster, who has no law but what he wants to do or she wants to do, who brings the whole thing down because it's an experience for her of just being powerful to destroy everything. It's frightening. That's a failed journey. So they try to get the heck out of there, but she grabs on and ends up in the wood. And then they jump into a pool thinking that'll take them home, and it doesn't. It takes them to not a dead place, but a nothing, a place of pure potential. There's no light, there's just nothing, nondescript nothingness. But the key is, the reason she comes there, Queen Jadis, is Andrew is holding on to her, which is important. Look at his hand. That tells you a lot about something in him. That darn hand won't let go of her heel. And he drags her into an unspoiled place of nothing. Now, one of the most beautiful and transcendent moments in this is the Cabby and his horse that also get dragged in, because as you know, the way the rings work, if you're touching someone with a ring, they go where the ring takes you. So they drag Queen Jadis, the Cabby, who was driving the cab that she had crushed and reduced to splinters by her intemperate life let loose in London. The horse comes, Polly and Diggory, and they all end up in this no place. And one of the most beautiful moments, I think, is the voice of the Cabby saying, "We have nothing to fear here if we've lived a good life. We all have to die sometime, and if that's what this is, it's okay. But since I'm not sure, I think we ought to sing a hymn." And so he picks a hymn. Why? And here's something about education that's so important. I was raised through a period of time where the affliction of having to memorize stuff was being expunged from education. That was considered just brutalizing and had nothing to do with education, to make kids memorize stuff. But often it's those things that you memorize, poems and prayers, are the things that you rely on. I remember in a recent experience in my life where, like it happens I've walked people through these kinds of things my whole life, where a sorrow so severe and so difficult came into my life. And I remember one night, all night, fighting for my life. And what I was saying from the deepest part of me, you people who are harming me are not God. God is God. God is the God of my life. You are not. Over and over, it was that. God is the God of my life, not you. And I, in such an extreme difficulty, you know the darn thing that popped up? And I ended up saying it 1,000 times that night. Was something I'd memorized as a little boy. It wasn't a hymn, but it was like it in the way I prayed it. 1,000 times that night I said, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." I bet I said it 1,000 times. And what I meant was, God, you are the God of my life. They are not. And that's what the Cabby does. He remembers a favorite hymn. Can I play it to you? I want you to hear this hymn that he sung in the nothingness of a Narnia before Narnia even existed. And I'll try to do a share screen here, which Mary set up so I could do this. I can find it there. And then I'll pop up the lyrics so you can follow along. I won't do the whole thing, but I want you to hear the Cabby's voice. With a single voice, he raises it in the dark place. And because of the way he sang, the others had also memorized that hymn. And so they joined him in the verses. This is what he sang. One more verse. That's what he sang. And it's so moving because that voice in the dark place and this small little group of two just hating the place and these starting to sing, you get this impression that their faith called the great lion Aslan into the nothing place and he began to sing. It's just beautiful. And the songs of Aslan are 4. And I want to finish by just describing in Lewis's words. The first song, "Hush," said the Cabby. They all listened. In the darkness, something was happening at last. A voice had begun to sing. It was very far away, and Diggory found it hard to decide from what direction it was coming. Sometimes it seemed to come from all directions at once. Sometimes he almost thought it was coming out of the earth beneath him. Its lower notes were deep enough to be the voice of the earth herself. There were no words. There was hardly even a tune. But it was beyond comparison the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. It was so beautiful, he could hardly bear it. And then to that first song of the unknown voice is added the voice of the stars in the heaven, that they just burst into complete, and their first expression in the dome of heaven is song. One moment there had been nothing but darkness. Next moment, 1,000 points of light leaped out. Single stars, constellations, and planets, brighter and bigger than any in our world. There were no clouds. The new stars and the new voices began at exactly the same time. If you had seen and heard it as Diggory did, you would have felt quite certain that it was the stars themselves which were singing. And it was the first voice, the deep one, which had made them appear and made them sing. Glory be, said the cabby. I'd have been a better man all my life if I'd known there were things like this. The second voice. The lion was pacing to and fro about the empty land and singing his new song. It was softer and more lilting than the song by which he had called upon the stars and the sun. A gentle, rippling music. And as he walked and sang, the valley grew green with grass. It spread out from the lion like a pool. It ran up the sides of little hills like a wave. Song number 3. In a few minutes, Diggory came to the edge of the wood, and there he stopped. The lion was singing still, but now the song had once more changed. It was more like what we should call a tune. But it was also far wilder. It made you want to run and jump and climb. It made you want to shout. God, I'm just thinking of kids in playgrounds in grade schools. They just run and they just jump and scream. And you say, my God, growth is noisy. And they just stop on a dime and then run, and then they hit each other and go. It made you want to rush at other people and either hug them or fight them. It made Diggory hot and red in the face. That's the song that calls all the animals up out of the earth, and they're bubbling like a bubbling in a pot with the water. And out pop all these animals until the world is filled with rah, rah, and oink, oink, and moo. There's just noise of voices everywhere. Song 4, and the last one. This will bring us to a conclusion. For the first time that day, there was complete silence. This is the 4th song, which is a silent song. A sounding solitude, as John of the Cross would put it. Except for the noise of running water. Diggory's heart beat wildly. He knew something very solemn was going to be done. He had not forgotten about his mother, but he knew jolly well that even for her, he couldn't interrupt a thing like this. The lion opened his mouth, but no sound came from it. He was breathing out a long, warm breath. It seemed to sway all the beasts as the wind sways a line of trees. Far overhead, from beyond the veil of blue sky, which hid them, the stars sang again. A pure, cold, difficult music. Then there came a swift flash like fire, but it burnt nobody, either from the sky or from the lion himself, and every drop of blood tingled in the children's bodies. And the deepest, wildest voice they had ever heard was saying, Narnia, 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 awake. Love, think, speak. Notice the order. Love, think, speak. It's not like our world. Speak. Maybe think. Don't bother with the third one. Be walking trees, be talking beasts, be divine waters. Give me a moment. Let me just conclude with this prayer that's a hymn out of respect for the Cabby, who knew when a hymn was appropriate and how to use it. And it's taken from the hymn, fittingly, Creator of the Stars of Night. That's the hymn. From north and south, from east to west, all praise and honor be addressed to God most holy, by whose grace God's people dwell in love's embrace. The poor, the rich stand side by side. To all, God's arms are opened wide. God beckons us to come, draw near, then comforts us and dries our tears. And we in turn must show God's care to all in need or in despair, that when our earthly course is run, we hear these words of God's own Son. Quote, the least to whom you gave your hand will walk with you to God's own land. By serving others and your Lord, you've gained your life and your reward. God bless you all. I so love being with you this way. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Father Ganz. And if you want to unshare your screen, then yeah, we can see everyone. Thank you all for joining and for being brave, those of you who were, in eating your dinner with us. It was just wonderful to get to actually see you. And we hope that you'll be able to join again next month when we read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And that will be Monday, October 2nd. So besides this month, when the first Monday was Labor Day, a holiday, the following Faber sessions will be the first Monday of each month. We'll obviously keep you updated, but next month will be October 2nd, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you're local, we would love to have you join us next Tuesday when we have our first night school of this series for night school. And that is in person next Tuesday evening. It used to be earlier. You'll note we changed it to a later time of 7 to 8 p.m. in Portland at West Hills Covenant Church. There is a live stream option, but we love being in person with people. And we know it's hard for people to get out of the routine of being at home and on their screens, which is a great option at times. But if you're local, we'd love to have you there in person. I'll include information about that. And if you're not local, we'd love for you to join the live stream as well. The night schools are more of a class rather than a discussion like the Faber sessions. It's a bit different in that way. But this night school class will be on, am I saying this right, Father Ganz? Terard Deschardins.
Teilhard de Chardin, SJ. Yes.
Yes. Again, thank you so much for being here. Feel free to unmute as you say goodbye, and we hope we'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Good night, Cora.
Blessings out.
Thank you very
Oh,
much.
nice to have you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.